So wrap up time, guys. $10 red-green lane destruction. We're starting with the same slide we started with last time, except this time it's filled with pink question marks. Where were they? There was no Tron to be found. We didn't run into any. I actually don't think I ran into any testing either, which is really surprising because I played probably at least 10 matches, maybe more, when I was kind of like tuning the deck and figuring out what I wanted to put in it. And yeah, I don't know what happened to all the Tron decks. Like every other week, we've run into like at least one, sometimes two, and this week just nothing. No Tron around. They're the ones we built the deck for. But on the bright side, we went 4-1 somehow. We won 8 out of our I guess 13 games. We lost 5. And this is just a little recap of how those games went and how we did. We went 2-1 against Eggs. Felt like a pretty 50-50 matchup. If they got out ahead a little bit, if they hit some of their mana ramp, we were in a little bit of trouble. Post-board, we got a little bit better just from the natural states being able to kill that imprint card that this particular variant of Eggs ran. I think it's a weird card to run in Eggs. I don't know if the top tier versions of Eggs run that. This might have been somebody's Eggs brew, but still pretty neat deck. Happy that we managed to 2-1 them. I certainly could see us losing though because they weren't super reliant on their lands. Fairies, we went 0-2. We lost both games. It's most creature beatdown decks we're going to be weak against. It's not one of the stronger creature beatdown decks. I was a little surprised that we didn't take one game off them. I think part of that was my sideboarding. But I will say they do a lot of things that our deck is actually very weak against. One, they're a beatdown deck. They can get out from under us pretty easily. They do have a lot of 2 and 3 mana creatures to put on the board. That's really what they rely on. And then also they have a bunch of counter spells, and counter spells are very strong against our land destruction. So I think those two things combined made them a very hard matchup. Ad Nauseam was one of the harder decks we ran into, one of the higher tier quote decks we ran into, and we managed to 2-1 them, which is great. I don't know if we're favored against them overall, but I think it's pretty close. I don't think it's like a huge percentage, like they might be 55, we might be 45, something like that. They do need a lot of mana to go off, and we basically managed to keep them off of it, and they didn't draw the draws that they sometimes get where they get a lot of mana that aren't in lands. So, I mean, part of the way they would get around us is by having turn 1 Lotus Bloom, and I think they didn't have turn 1 Lotus Bloom any game. I think game 1 they won off a Lotus Bloom, but they played it pretty late, and I think the other games they just didn't get one, or we killed them before then, or I don't remember. Maybe they got one game 2 or 3, actually, I think. But whatever. The bottom line is disrupting their mana base was actually pretty powerful, and it made them have to do a lot of slightly awkward things to stay in the game. Our 4th matchup was against, I don't know why I say Ad Nauseam there, that's a typo. Obviously that was Polymorph. We went 2-1 against Polymorph as well. I don't know if we're favored. We might be less than 50-50. It's not a super strong deck in the meta, but we are very weak against Planeswalkers, which they seem to have a lot of, and they are slow enough for us to combat the mana, which is good, but they also have a lot of ways to sneak things out, like the lane that produces an 0-1 creature, so they have a target for Polymorph and things like that. So yeah, we managed to beat them, but I think that one was probably a close matchup for us. And then our last match, we went 2-0 against some kind of blue, red, white tempo deck. It had Delver of Souls, Young Pyromancer, and then Storm Chaser Mage and Monastery Swiftspear. So it kind of had this prowess. Basically, it was a spells matter deck. It had prowess, it had Delver, which flips based on spells, and it had Pyromancer, which uses spells to build an army of 1/1s. I mean, I don't know how favored we are against them. I felt very lucky to win game 2, but their mana was pretty awkward in this particular build of the deck. So, like, I think the second game, I trapped them on just white mana, which I just don't think they have that much white stuff. They have some. They had, like, Boros Charm. I wouldn't be surprised if they had Lightning Helix. I don't remember if they played it on me in any of the games, but it's something they would probably have. But yeah, their mana was awkward enough that we managed to get them stuck on it pretty well. And they are somewhat susceptible to things like Pyroclasm. I think the Storm Chaser Mage is the only thing that survives that unless they play a spell. So we might be favored, but it's probably pretty close. Again, it's one of those ones that depends on us drawing our sweepers. You board the sweepers in post-board, and hope for the best, hope you draw one, basically. Because you're probably not going to be fast enough, and they can run on low enough mana that you're not going to win without sweepers or without them making some slightly awkward mana decisions. And then there were 2 matches that I played that I actually started 3. The Ad Nauseam guy joined a match that I was hosting, and then immediately it was like, oh crap, it's that guy I played against before. I don't want all my lands being destroyed again, and left. But we also did play a single game in 2 different matchups. One was some kind of creature toolbox matchup. I didn't play far enough to know what they were. They gave up the whole match after a few minutes. Basically, they played down 2 creatures by turn 2. I Pyroclasmed the creatures away. They played another creature, and I think a land. I can't remember if they played a land or not turn 3. And then I played a Stone Rain, and then they were ready to scoop. They were like, I don't want to play against the Stone Rain deck. Maybe I would have won game 1. Like, that's probably, my guess is that they were stuck on mana a little bit, and they were like, I'm not going to win with Stone Rain. I probably have, like, collective companies in my hand that I'm relying on being able to play, which you took me off of. So I'm guessing they got a little frustrated and just scooped it because of that. In the instant Reanimator one, we lost the game, and I think we probably would have lost the match. It seems really strong against us. It's the problem with Modern. So the problem with our deck in Modern is we really don't get going until turn 3. And what that means is we're mostly keeping decks from getting to 3 to 5 mana. And some decks use 3 to 5 mana, but a lot of decks in Modern currently, especially in the top tier, really only rely on having 2 to 3 mana at any given time. And it's hard for us to keep them off of much more than that, especially with the budget version. And even with the powered up version, it would still be pretty hard. Basically, the Instant Reanimator had Goryo's Vengeance and used it turn 2, and that's pretty much all she wrote. I mean, it didn't quite go down like that because they took us to, I think, 13 off of a Grizzlebrand, but then drew 12 cards and then used those 12 cards to do the Karizev's Expertise combo with Breaking and Entering, and then get an Emrakul on the battlefield. And then it's just like, what do you do? Actually, I don't think they did get an Emrakul. I think they just got another Grizzlebrand on the battlefield, but it stuck around, and that was like down to 3 life, and they still had a Grizzlebrand, and they had like 14 cards in hand and had to discard to hand size, and it was like, alright, scoop time. But yeah, they didn't play any farther than that because, I mean, quite frankly, they said they had to go, but it might have just been that they didn't want to play out the matchup because they figured they would almost definitely win, and it wasn't good practice for them. Those are the 2 ones that got cut just because they only went to 1 game. And so why was our record so good? We went 4-1. I said I thought we would go closer to 1-4. So the first thing to note is we just didn't run into any top tier. We ran into 0 top tier decks. We ran into, well, that was decks at least that I would consider tier 1. We ran into 2 decks that I would consider tier 2. One was the Instant Speed Reanimator, which just only played 1 game against us and then left, and I think they would have beaten us. The other was Ad Nauseam, which I don't think has a great matchup against us, but not a bad matchup. And then everything else was tier 3 or below. They're pretty much all decks that I've seen before, I've heard of, I think I've played against all of them at least once, but they're not the super common, super powerful decks. We didn't run into Affinity, Death Shadow Aggro, Tron, Lantern Control, a lot of the super oppressive decks that I would view as close to tier 1. Jund is another one. I actually don't know how bad or good or bad our Jund matchup would be. It probably depends a lot if they manage to resolve a Liliana, but you know, 8-rack could have been pretty ugly, I guess. And so, largely because they're tier 3, like the thing that makes them tier 3, a lot of these decks, is how slow they are. And slow decks are exactly what we're good against. We're good at kind of grinding down their land base and keeping them from doing the big powerful things that the slower decks want to do. And we also got pretty lucky in our draws. I mean, we had some awkward draws, but we didn't have any draws that were just non-functional. And if any set of 5 games, I usually have 1 or 2 games, sometimes 1 or 2 matches I just lose to non-functional draws, especially with a budget deck. And we do have a lot of fixing from that because we have a 1-drop and a 2-drop that fix our mana a little bit, but basically we just never ended up getting into the situation where we had non-functional draws. I kept a couple risky ones where I was like, well, I really need to get to 4 mana, and I always, when I was in that state, I think I always did. I can't remember any games where I didn't. So we lucked out a little bit. And I will say I tested about 5 games or so. I don't remember how many. I basically tested a bunch of different versions of this deck. The Deus of Calamity was a late add. I was running a single Terastodon and then Primal commands to fetch him out, and then some Eternal Witnesses to recur them originally. It took me a little bit over the $10 limit, which was part of the reason I took them out. And then I also was not very proactive, which the Deus of Calamity does a much better job being. Back when I was playing that other build, and even some builds that were more similar to this one, I think it was close to 50%, but it was probably closer to like 40%. I did win some games, but I certainly didn't win most of my games. So I think the 4-1 is very much an anomaly. This is not a good deck. Don't think that this is a good deck just because I happen to go 4-1 with it. This is this is a $10 deck that's also a pretty bad $10 deck, but it is fun to play as long as your opponents don't get too salty, which most of my opponents didn't seem to get salty, so I don't think it was too bad. And then we'll go on, we'll do a look at the deck again and the overperformers and underperformers. I only chose 2 good ones and 2 bad ones because the middle stuff was it felt very middle. It was like good situationally, or, you know, it just wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. So what did I think was really good? Goblin Dark-Dwellers, in my testing earlier, there were a few times where I had to play it, but I didn't have targets for it. I don't think I really ran into that this time. It felt like I was always putting a 4/4 on the board and destroying a land, and that's just really powerful. I don't think I ever ran into it, but you can also put a 4/4 on the board and flash back a Pyroclasm sometimes against super aggro decks, and that's also really useful. And so, for me, in this series of games, he definitely performed very, very well. And the other one that performed very, very well was the Acid-Moss. I found myself in a lot of situations feeling like I was stuck on 4 mana and really needing to get to 5 for the Dark-Dwellers and the Deus of Calamity, and that pushed me over the edge while also setting my opponent back. So that did a really good job. And then the ones that weren't so good, Avalanche Riders, I noted right away. I just didn't think it was super good in the deck, and it felt very awkward because, yeah, it's a 4 mana land destruction, which is good, but most of the time, you don't really want to pay his Echo unless it's super late game. So he's just a land destruction spell for 4, just a 4 mana Stone Rain, and that's just not that important. Yeah, he can sometimes stick on the board for a turn and either force their Goblin Guide not to attack or trade with him, but he didn't do that this time around. So yeah, just kind of mediocre. And Harmonize, Harmonize is hard. It was okay some games, but it's just not proactive, and it feels like it puts you behind. And part of the thing about land destruction is you really got to stay on top of destroying all their lands all the time. And if you fall behind in that battle, it's practically worthless to even be a land destruction deck. So that's my one complaint about Harmonize. It feels a little expensive and awkward to play and doesn't necessarily put you where you want to. So those are the ones I'd probably be most likely to cut with a new version of the deck. And finally, we're going to have a slide that like I had last time. I didn't actually build a powered up version of the deck. I don't actually own most of these cards to actually build this deck at all, but I wanted to go through some of the things that I would suggest putting in a powered up version of the deck. First off, Fulminator Mage is one of the most powerful land destruction spells in Modern because it is a 2/2 that also destroys land. It's kind of what Avalanche Rider wants to be. So it comes down as a 2/2 on turn 3, and if you need it as land destruction, you can just sack it right away and destroy the land. And if you don't, it's just a 2/2 on the field. So it doesn't have the sticking power of the Avalanche Rider, but at the same time, Avalanche Rider, very rarely do you actually pay Echo. And the other disadvantage of Fulminator Mage is it has to be a non-basic, but I don't think in any of the games we played did our opponent play a significant number of non-basics. That's not to say they never will, but in the games we happened to play, we really didn't run into a deck that was playing a ton of basic lands. So yeah, Fulminator Mage is very good. You might sideboard it out if you're against a Merfolk deck that's only running islands, but for the most part, it would be great in the deck. If we had fetches and shocks, we could have played Utopia Sprawl. I mean, it was a little bit out of budget anyway, just because Utopia Sprawl is a little bit expensive, but I tried it in the deck anyway, just to be like, oh, whatever, we'll do a $15 budget and see if I can make Utopia Sprawl work, because I think destroying lands on turn 2 rather than turn 3 is super important for the deck. But the problem is, with a budget mana base, you just don't have that many forests, because you need the 2 red mana to hit your Molten Rains. And so, if you need the 2 red mana to hit the Molten Rains, you gotta run some kind of dual lands, and those dual lands, unfortunately, at the budget mana base, aren't actually forests or mountains. So you can't attach Utopia Sprawl to them. That means over half our lands just don't get hit by Utopia Sprawl, and that just turns it into a bad ramp spell. So that's the reason those didn't go in. Also, just because of budget, I wanted to keep it under $10. But if you're running 4 Stomping Grounds and a bunch of fetch lands, you know, as well as a bunch of basic forests and mountains, getting the Utopia Sprawl on one of those is pretty easy. What else? Boom Bust. Boom Bust has a lot of really cool interactions. It's a 2 mana land destruction spell. So the idea is that it's the reason it's only 2 mana is because it's symmetric. You have to destroy one of your target lands and one of your opponent's target lands. However, you can target your fetch land and then crack it in response and still get the land with it and just fizzle that half of it while destroying your opponent's land. So basically it becomes a 2 mana destroy your opponent's land. And you can also put in some Flagstones of Trocaire. And if you put in the Flagstones of Trocaire, you can target your Flagstones, destroy your opponent's land, and when you kill the Flagstones, you can fetch a Plains. And what I suggest doing is putting in 1 or 2 of the white green and the white red fetch lands. I think Sacred Foundry and Temple Garden. Grabbing those with Flagstones when it goes to the bin off of Boom. So it's a little questionable whether you want to add the 4 white mana to your mana base, which waters down your deck slightly, just in order to have this interaction. But I think if you wanted to make this deck really competitive, it very well might be worth it. So that's the option there. And then there's these other synergies. I think one of the ones I talked about already slightly earlier, Eternal Witness and Primal Command are very strong in this type of deck, especially if your ramp is a little better. It's a little bit of a slow interaction, but basically Primal Command can put a land from their battlefield on top of their library, and then also fetch you an Eternal Witness, and then you can play the Eternal Witness to get back Primal Command. Then you can Primal Command, put a land on top of their library, get another Eternal Witness, and keep doing this. Obviously, that's an 8 mana loop, and you can only do it a set number of times, but it puts your opponent really far behind on board, so it's pretty powerful when you can do it. And the Primal Command also lets you run a few less of your super high-end creatures, because you can fetch them off of it. So, if you don't want to fetch an Eternal Witness, you could fetch a Deus of Calamity or Goblin Dark-Dwellers and use those as kind of your finisher to do whatever you need to do. And it also is useful because it gives you 7 life, and getting you 7 life in a lot of matchups is what you need in order to stabilize with the deck. So I don't know if it's worth running or not. I ran it for a little while. I don't know if my record was better or worse with it. I think it was actually worse with it, but I think I ran up against better decks, so I'm not totally convinced whether it should be in the deck or not. It's certainly a powerful effect. 5 mana is a little expensive, and we don't have that many 5 mana slots. Right now they're all threats, so that's the one disadvantage to Primal Command, is it's not really a threat. And then lastly, Beast Within is a pretty good card to put in the deck. It's basically land destruction, but it gives them a 3/3, which sucks. But the nice thing is, in addition to being land destruction, it's also a Planeswalker kill if you need a Planeswalker kill. Or you can use it on your own land and put in a 3/3 if you just desperately need to block some aggro deck. Instant speed, put out a 3/3, block a Goblin Guide, save yourself from dying, have a 3/3 on the board to block the next couple turns, and get the trigger off the Goblin Guide and hopefully draw another land or something. So, it's definitely a powerful card, powerful ability. I don't know if it would go in the deck. It would probably at least go in the sideboard as Planeswalker answer, just because it has so much utility. If they're just like a super heavy Planeswalker deck, I would probably put in the sideboard. So anyway, that's the upgrade suggestions. That's the deck for the week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Hey guys, Bobgar here. I just really wanted to quickly say, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you enjoy my content in general and would like to see more of it, subscribe. I'll be coming out with content, probably not as frequently as I would like, but I will be coming out with more content in the future. And please leave me comments and let me know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, both in terms of production and in terms of my play and my deck building and all that. Yeah, and again, as I always say, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time.